Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really compelling stack of sources in front of us today. We're looking primarily at Chapter 12 of Think and Grow Rich, but also some really valuable editor's commentary that adds more modern perspective.
Yeah, it's a dive into some incredibly powerful ideas. And let's be honest, sometimes challenging ideas about what really motivates people,
Yeah.
What drives them to exceptional achievement.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive is to pull out the most impactful insights from this material. We're specifically looking at the connections it draws between, well, human sexuality, personal charisma, that spark of creativity, and what the source actually calls genius.
We're going to try and unpack how these forces might be linked and maybe more importantly, how they could potentially be harnessed.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The source kicks off talking about the basic drivers of human action. And, we all understand the fundamentals: food, water, shelter, survival needs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Psychological research is pretty much unanimous on those being primary motivators.
This source even mentions Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs as, an example of that kind of thinking. It outlines those levels from basic survival right up to self-actualization and even beyond.
But where this material really takes a turn, I think, is its focus on what drives us after those primary needs are met.
Yeah.
Once you're not just focused on surviving day to day.
Exactly. The source cites agreement among various researchers, Napoleon Hill included, that once those fundamental life-sustaining needs are basically handled, the desire for sex and love consistently rank as the next most powerful forces motivating us.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, the unique angle this source takes. Hill wasn't just looking at sex and love in the usual biological sense.
Right.
He was really digging into this question. If these drives are so powerful, so incredibly capable of making people act, can that energy be intentionally, directed, channeled towards achieving something outstanding, like building wealth or creating something major?
The source uses terms like sex emotion and sex energy. And the editor's commentary points out, quite helpfully, I think, that today we might use broader terms like sexuality or maybe passion or even charisma to describe how this energy shows up outwardly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the source gives this list of 10 mind stimuli, things that really get the mind going, things it responds to most freely. It's quite revealing to look at the top few.
Definitely. Number 1 is the desire for sexual expression. Number 2 is love. 3 is a burning desire for fame, power, or money. 4 is music. And 5 is close friendship or admiration.
So the core idea here, according to the source, is that the world isn't really run by cold, hard reason. It's run by emotions. And your creativity, your ability to come up with new stuff, is set in motion almost entirely by those emotional forces, not logic.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that number 1 stimulus then, the desire for sexual expression. The source really emphasizes that this is right at the top of the list of forces that step up the mind and lead to physical action.
And what's fascinating from this perspective is the claim that when people are primarily motivated by this desire, they often show levels of courage, willpower, persistence, imagination, creative ability, things they just don't usually display.
Yeah.
The source even says they'll risk their life, their reputation. It compares it to a river that absolutely has to find an outlet somewhere.
That's a powerful image, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the key insight isn't that you should, suppress this desire.
Not at all.
It's that this energy can be and maybe should be given other outlets.
Yeah.
Directions that actually enrich your mind, your body, your spirit. When you harness it and redirect it away from just the physical, that's the concept the source calls transmutation.
Right, transmutation. And the source directly connects this idea to major creative achievements, whether that's in writing, art, or even accumulating, great wealth.
It gives a specific example, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About a teacher of salespeople.
Yeah, who observed that the most effective salespeople were consistently the ones who were the most sexually confident individuals.
And the source's explanation for that link is this thing called personal magnetism, that quality that just draws people in, which, as you said, we now mostly call charisma. It's seen as a direct outward sign of this intersexual energy.
The editor's comments add some useful context here, though. They point out that, modern psychology often looks at physical traits, gender, height, attractiveness, that sort of thing.
Right, and those studies do show perceived advantages for certain looks.
Exactly. But the source is quick to say, look, success isn't limited to people with those specific traits. Obviously not.
And that's where this idea of charisma becomes so crucial. Clearly, there's another kind of attractiveness, right? Something beyond the physical that often matters even more.
Definitely. It's connected to sexuality in this framework, but it's not just about being, sexy in the conventional sense. It's that chemistry, that personality, that charm, that presence.
What Hill called personal magnetism.
And what we call charisma. According to the source, good sales managers look for that first, because people who lack that kind of underlying energy, that magnetism, they just won't generate enthusiasm. They won't inspire confidence.
And enthusiasm is key, the source argues. In sales, leadership, anything where you need to move people.
So the core idea is that top performers, like the master salespeople in the example, get there by consciously or maybe unconsciously transmuting that inner charisma, that sexual energy, into outward enthusiasm and drive.
That's the practical meaning of sexual transmutation then. Taking that powerful energy and redirecting it. Switching your focus from purely physical thoughts to, thoughts and actions of a different kind. A more productive kind.
And it's not fixed. The source says you can cultivate this, develop it. It lists ways this energy or charisma gets communicated. Your handshake.
Oh yeah, the handshake test.
Right. The tone of your voice charisma apparently makes it more musical, more charming. Your posture, how you carry yourself.
Yeah.
Charismatic people often move with grace and energy, it says.
The vibrations of thought, too, how your personality projects.
Yeah, and even things like how you dress, your personal style. It's about a whole projection of vitality, really.
Okay, so let's bridge this from personal charisma to actual creative output. The source talks about one of Napoleon Hill's key findings from analyzing successful men.
Ah, yes. He claimed that practically every great leader he studied was significantly inspired by a woman, often a wife, sometimes described as the other woman.
The source basically says history is supposedly full of examples of great men whose big achievements can be traced back to the influence of women who, in Hill's view anyway, helped awaken their creative side.
It gives specific examples like Napoleon Bonaparte claims he was irresistible at his peak when inspired by Josephine, but then declined after they separated.
Or Abraham Lincoln, who the source suggests really found and started using his creative imagination effectively after meeting Anne Rutledge.
And it lists others, Washington, Shakespeare, Emerson, claiming that wherever they could find evidence, it pointed to a highly developed sexual nature and often a powerful motivational influence from a partner or lover.
So Hill drew some pretty big conclusions from looking at these biographies. First, he believed the greatest achievers have this highly developed sexual nature, but they've mastered transmutation.
Right. Second, that people who amassed great fortunes or got major recognition were often motivated by a partner's influence.
Third, when people are driven by these specific emotions, sex, love, they get this sort of superpower for action.
And fourth, the source flat out concludes that sexual transmutation holds the secret to unlocking creative ability. It's a big claim.
It is. And it's important, as the editor notes, to remember the historical context. Hill's analysis was limited by the biographies available then, which were mostly about men.
Absolutely. Today, you've got plenty of biographies of incredibly successful women, so you can look at their lives and relationships and draw your own conclusions about similar dynamics.
What's interesting from the editor's modern view is the observation about contemporary media. Celebrity news, scandals involving leaders in sports, business, politics.
Yeah, the intimate details are often out there.
And while it's definitely not scientific proof, the editor suggests the sheer frequency of these stories might make a kind of common sense case that there could be a correlation between high energy, high passion, and success, regardless of, the scandals sometimes involved.
But, and this is crucial, the source quickly clarifies, just having a highly developed sexual nature doesn't automatically make you a genius or guarantee success.
Right. That energy has to be transmuted, redirected from purely physical desire into some other form of desire or action. That's what supposedly elevates someone to the status of genius in this view.
Okay, so how does this all tie into the idea of genius itself? The source gives a specific definition here. A genius, in this context, is someone who's figured out how to increase their thought intensity so much that they can communicate with sources of knowledge not available through just ordinary thinking.
Which immediately raises questions, doesn't it? Like, how do you do that? Is it only for geniuses? How do you actually reach these sources?
And the editor connects this right to the idea of the sixth sense, seeing it as a kind of perception or intuition beyond our usual five senses. Hill, according to the source, is exploring that link between sexuality, motivation, creative imagination, and this sixth sense.
The source states the reality of a sixth sense is fairly well established and argues that this sixth sense is basically the creative imagination.
And here's a thought that might make you pause. The source claims most people never deliberately use their creative imagination. Only a small number who consciously do it are considered geniuses by this definition.
Wow. So the creative imagination is described as the direct link between your everyday, finite mind and what the source calls infinite intelligence. This is the channel through which big revelations, discoveries, totally new ideas are said to come.
So where do those sudden insights come from, those aha moments, those gut feelings? The source lists just 4 possibilities.
Okay, what are they?
From another person's conscious thought, from your own subconscious mind, which stores, everything you've ever experienced from someone else's subconscious, or from this infinite intelligence. That's it. No other options mentioned.
Interesting. So using those 10 mind stimulants we talked about earlier, especially sex, love, strong desire, is seen as a way to ramp up your brain activity.
Yeah, like taking off in an airplane, it says. It lifts your mind above the everyday fog, lets you see beyond the normal horizon. And up there, on that higher plane, everyday worries fade, your creative faculty gets freed up, and that sixth sense becomes receptive to ideas you just couldn't reach otherwise.
And that ability to consciously tap into that faculty is what separates the genius from the ordinary person, according to the source.
And crucially, it says this faculty isn't just innate. It can only be cultivated, developed, strengthened through use. Using a mind stimulant increases your thought intensity, making that connection to infinite intelligence or your subconscious more likely.
The source even suggests that our conscience, that still small voice inside, operates entirely through this sixth sense. It's guiding us from within.
And great artists, writers, musicians, poets, they become great, according to this, because they learn to rely on that inner voice, accessing it through their creative imagination. People with strong imaginations often know their best ideas just pop in as hunches, right?
Yeah. The source gives examples of people seemingly using techniques for this, like a speaker closing their eyes before a key point to speak from within.
Or a financier closing his eyes for a moment before a big decision, trying to tap into what he felt was superior intelligence.
But the really detailed example is Dr. Elmer R. Gates.
Yeah, that's fascinating. He got over 200 patents by actively cultivating his creative faculty. She had this specific process.
Tell us about it.
He'd sit in a soundproof, dark room, concentrate intensely on all the known facts of whatever problem he was tackling, and then just wait for ideas about the unknown parts to sort of flash into his mind. The source says he sometimes wrote for hours, basically earning a living by sitting for ideas.
Wow. And this highlights another point the source makes, doesn't it? That ordinary reasoning based on your past experience can be flawed because maybe your knowledge is incomplete or wrong.
Exactly. Whereas creative ideas coming from these other sources, your subconscious infinite intelligence, are presented as potentially more reliable.
So the real difference between a genius and an ordinary inventor, in this view, isn't just having ideas, but using both faculties. The synthesized one, logic, reasoning unknowns, and the creative one, accessing insights from elsewhere.
Right. The process involves stimulating the mind, focusing hard on what you know while visualizing what you don't know, then kind of letting go, letting the subconscious take over, relaxing, and waiting for the answer to bubble up. Edison's process with the light bulb and phonograph is cited as being similar methodical work combined with waiting for those flashes of insight.
And the editor's comments here are really helpful for connecting this older idea to modern concepts.
Definitely. They link Hill's ideas to things like synchronicity, precognition, intuition, symbolic dreams, stuff that modern psychology founders like Freud and Jung also explored. Jung's collective unconscious has some parallels to this idea of infinite intelligence, arguably.
And scientists throughout history, right? Archimedes, Newton, Einstein, Watson, and Crick.
Yeah.
Many have talked about intuition playing a key role in their breakthroughs.
The editor even mentions Duke University studying these phenomena and gives examples like Kekule figuring out the benzene ring from a dream,
Lowy winning a Nobel based on a dream about nerve impulses,
Watson having an intuition about the DNA structure. Artists, too. Mozart, Shelley, Coleridge, Stevenson, Blake, all credited intuition. Even Winston Churchill apparently believed in a premonition he had.
So the editor points out that while concepts like infinite intelligence faced a lot of skepticism, much like early psychiatry or hypnosis did,
Right.
they've gained public interest. And research today continues to find, well, the editor calls them tantalizing results, even if they're hard to pin down in a traditional lab.
Now, the source takes a bit of a turn here, discussing different kinds of mind stimulants. It contrasts those natural internal triggers like love and desire with artificial ones.
Yeah. It acknowledges that some famous creative people, some known geniuses like Edgar Allan Poe, Coleridge, Robert Burns, They did use artificial stimulants, alcohol, drugs.
But, and this is the much more important lesson the source drives home, think about the huge number of people who completely destroyed themselves using those same artificial stimulants.
It's a crucial warning. The editor's commentary uses a really modern analogy here, the VH1 series Behind the Music.
Oh yeah, that pattern is undeniable.
Right, that repeated story. Success fueled by a lifestyle, often involving, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, relying on that artificial buzz.
Yeah.
Which then so often leads to addiction, loss, burnout, total destruction.
It's a stark illustration of the danger of relying on artificial means, especially if you want to actually keep and enjoy your success, not just have a brief flash.
The source is really clear. Stimulation in excess, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or even overindulging in sexual expression itself, is destructive. It's intemperance. It compares someone totally obsessed and driven only by sexual desire to an addict, someone who's lost control of their reason, their willpower.
And while sexuality is described as this mighty, powerful urge, it's also compared to a cyclone. If you're driven only by that raw emotion without any guidance or control, yeah, you might achieve things, but your actions are likely to be chaotic, maybe destructive, and probably not sustainable.
The source makes a pretty bold claim here. Harnessing that sexual energy without self-control might lead to money or recognition. But history shows those people often develop character flaws. Impulsiveness, lack of discipline that eventually rob them of the ability to hold on to their fortune or even enjoy it. Being ignorant of this pitfall, the source says, has cost thousands their happiness, even after they reach the top materially.
And that analysis of 25,000 people in the source, it found that major success often comes later in life, after 40, maybe 50.
Why is that, according to the source?
The main reason suggested is that people tend to just dissipate their energies, especially this vital life force, through overindulgence when they're younger. Many, it argues, never really learn the potential of sexual energy beyond the purely physical. They might stumble onto transmutation later by accident without even knowing what happened or why they suddenly became more capable.
Which brings us to the really critical balancing force the source emphasizes: love.
Yes. According to this material, the combination of love, romance, and sex is uniquely powerful. It's what can really drive people to superachievement. When they're blended, they can lift you to the level of a genius, it claims.
Genuine love is described as spiritual, leaving lasting positive effects. And the source actually considers anyone who can't be stimulated by love to be, hopeless in terms of reaching their highest potential through this particular path.
And here's a fascinating, maybe unexpected take on lost love from the source. It suggests you're not unfortunate if you've loved deeply and lost.
Really?
Yeah. Someone who has truly loved, in this view, can never lose completely. Love is described as whimsical. You should accept it, enjoy it when it's there, but don't despair if it leaves. It comes and goes. It's different each time, but it's always beneficial unless you let yourself become bitter or cynical about it.
That's quite a perspective. It even suggests that just the memory of past love could be a powerful stimulant.
Exactly. It can lift your mind, energize you, offer an escape from current worries, and potentially even spark profound ideas or plans from your subconscious that could literally change your life.
So understanding the difference between love and sex is key here, isn't it? To avoid disappointment.
Absolutely. Love is presented as an emotion with many shades, most intense when it's blended with sex, but still distinct. Happy relationships need love balanced with sex, it argues. Sex is biological. Love is spiritual.
And because love is spiritual, it's not inherently harmful.
Unless it gets mixed with negative stuff like ignorance or jealousy. Then the source compares it to a deadly poison that can wreck your sense of fairness and justice.
So in this framework, love acts as a kind of safety valve. A balance for reason and constructive effort.
Precisely. It's called life's greatest experience, and it's seen as a pathway to connect with that infinite intelligence. When love is guiding your powerful emotions, it consistently directs you towards creative, positive actions.
Okay, so pulling it all together. The road to what this source calls genius fundamentally involves the conscious development, the careful control, and the deliberate use of these energies: sex, love, and romance.
And the practical process. It's about actively encouraging positive emotions, making them the dominant thoughts in your mind, while actively discouraging the destructive ones. The mind, it reminds us, is a creature of habit. It becomes like the thoughts you feed it most.
So you gain control through willpower, persistence, and building positive habits.
Exactly. And the key mechanism, the secret sauce for that control and redirection, is transmutation. taking a negative emotion, acknowledging its energy, and consciously changing its direction into a positive one, just by shifting your dominant thoughts. It's an active process.
The source concludes pretty strongly on this point. There is no other road to genius than through voluntary self-effort, through mastering and redirecting these incredibly powerful internal forces.
So, quite a journey through these sources today. We've explored this very specific, very potent framework for thinking about human motivation, creativity, and really pushing towards exceptional achievement.
Yeah, we've seen how these fundamental energies, especially the desire for sexual expression, are viewed here not just as basic urges, but as powerful forces. Forces that, when they're transmuted, when they're guided by love and romance, can become this engine for creativity and potentially even give access to insights beyond ordinary thought, that infinite intelligence.
And we've also touched on the significant dangers, haven't we? The pitfalls of overindulgence, relying on artificial stimulants, which history and even modern examples like those behind the music stories show can totally derail success, even when someone reaches the very top.
Right, this exploration of your sources lays out a specific kind of roadmap for thinking about how to harness your inner drives. It really emphasizes self-control, the incredible power of your emotions, and the elevating force of love in reaching your highest potential.
Based on all this, here's a final thought for you, the listener. Okay, maybe mull over. The source makes this really striking claim. It says that when the emotion of romance is added to those of love and sex, the barriers between the finite mind and infinite intelligence are removed. And then a genius has been born. What might that specific combination, love, sex, and romance together, suggest about the conditions under which the most profound creative breakthroughs and insights really happen in human experience?